According to Jenny Flynn Cataldo, a 30-something-year-old woman from Alabama, United States, she was the victim of one of the largest cases of political corruption in the state's history. The Attorney General and state governor had conspired to steal over $17 million from her, which she was awarded due to a medical negligence lawsuit. If that wasn't bad enough, the medical negligence was also going to cost Jenny her life and rob her 3-year-old son of a mother, the husband of a wife, and the parents of a daughter. This is how one of the most disgusting, unbelievable cases of fraud was exposed for all to see. In 2014, life for Jenny Cataldo and her family was not the American dream they'd pictured. They were broke, Jenny was sick due to medical malpractice, and they were living only due to the charity of others. This is one of those situations where they'd say things can only go up from here. Unfortunately for Jenny though, she was diagnosed with late-stage cancer, a shock to her friends and family who rallied around her to give support in any way they could. Her parents took on the role of provider, paying for the bills of their daughter, son-in-law and grandson, leaving Jenny to focus on trying to fight back against the terrible circumstances she now faced. To make matters worse, part of Jenny's focus was not on her recovery, but on the politicians who were allegedly waiting for her to die so that they could keep the money she was owed. Despite the then Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg traveling to Alabama to personally investigate why Jenny hadn't received the payout, despite a federal judge getting involved to try and help her get that money, nothing was working. And this lawsuit settlement would perhaps have saved Jenny's life, or at least allowed for her to live comfortably, taking care of her family, paying back her parents and friends, making sure that her son would be provided for when she was gone, which looked to be sooner rather than later. Despite monthly hospital visits and extensive experimental treatments around the world, including one costing over $10,000 in Australia, Jenny's health showed no signs of improvement. It was time now for acceptance. On September 13, 2016, a GoFundMe was created by a man named Will Pearson on behalf of the family, titled Jenny Flynn Cataldo Medical Care. Quote, "As many of you may know, our dear friend Jenny Flynn Cataldo has been battling cancer for over 3 years now. This is how the post started out. He goes on to explain that unfortunately things have been going badly with treatment, and the goal of the GoFundMe was to give Jenny as much time as possible with her precious now 6-year-old son Flynn and her husband Daniel. The goal was set at $20,000, though due to the kind-hearted nature and charity of strangers, friends and family, went on to raise $27,755. On top of this, another campaign was started with the goal of fulfilling the dream of taking her family to Disneyland, one last big hurrah, one last big holiday, which raised $10,000, double the original goal. And so with this, the remaining months and years of Jenny's life would be taken care of by strangers on social media, as well as the continued support of friends and family. In total, she managed to raise over $260,000 from friends and the public, while her parents burned through their entire retirement fund of nearly $500,000 to keep her and the family comfortable throughout. An expensive 3 years, but you can't really put a price on human life, especially if that human is a close friend or a family member. Now this is where things started to get really bad. Due to the worsening of Jenny's condition as well as the dwindling retirement fund, her father Robert Flynn, a retired Vietnam veteran, did the only thing he could think to do. He started contacting journalists to try and expose the political corruption his daughter had been telling him about for the last 3 years. He was not a man to give up, even if Jenny seemingly had already done so, and if he could expose these politicians to the right person, maybe, just maybe, he could get his daughter the payout she was owed. The journalist to bite was Josh Moon of the Alabama Political Reporter, and he was more than keen to help. In his own words, quote, "The email in my inbox had a subject line that read, 'Political corruption.' In Alabama, given recent history, that's an email you open immediately, even if you don't recognize the sender's name." The next day, he contacted the father, Robert Flynn, and discussed his daughter's case. Sympathetic to the situation, he listened to Robert explain everything, how he'd burned through nearly $500,000 supporting his daughter, and that they were almost out of options to continue. He begged Josh to get involved to, quote, "get us out of this hell." Josh and his colleagues did what they could, spending the next several days putting together a timeline of the events, trying to figure out just how this unfathomable political corruption had been allowed to take place, and why people so far up the food chain were actually involved in this. What they found instead was that since 2014, for the past 3 years, Jenny Flynn Cataldo had not been totally honest with her family. There was no medical malpractice lawsuit. The political figures she claimed to have spoken to didn't know who she was. The lawyers that represented her didn't either. There was no court documents, no medical documents, nothing to back up what she was saying. This means that there was no payout coming. The friends and family who'd given her substantial sums of money would be without reimbursement. A terrible lie to sell, to tell these people who loved you the most. But nearing the end of your life can do strange things. I'm sure her parents, her family, her friends would have supported her even if they knew there was no payout coming in the first place, as that's what family does. It's likely they would also have forgiven her, if that's where the lie ended. Unfortunately, it isn't. During a phone interview in early April, Jenny explained how she got sick and why that situation led to the nearly $17 million lawsuit she allegedly won. Dirty instruments were used to perform a biopsy on me, and from that I contracted sepsis in my blood. The sepsis later turned into cancer. Now I have 3 tumours in my brain and 12 tumours in my abdomen. I lost a kidney, and the other, the doctor said, is filled with cancer. I'm on dialysis. Now, I'm not a medical professional, but I don't have to be one to know that this is a lie. So when she told this story to the journalists who were looking into the situation at behest of the father Robert, her struggling Vietnam veteran father, needless to say, they were tipped off to the reality of Jenny's situation. You see, Jenny was not at the end of her battle. She wasn't even at the start. She never had cancer. She spent the last 3 years lying to her community, her friends, her family, her husband, and even her 3-year-old son, who at this time was 6. The young boy was growing up in a household where he and everyone around him thought his mother was not long for this world. Instead, she just made up the story to exploit the charity and kindness of those who loved her most, as well as the goodwill of the general public who supported the GoFundMe campaigns. If anyone feels like they could still give even a little, the anxiety finances could be lifted some. I do trust that God has a plan to make all ends meet. Thank you for being a powerful group of friends in helping me go forward, and when I do pass on, my family can afford it and Flynn can still make it. According to Jenny's mother, Sally, she was driving Jenny to medical appointments dozens of times per year, although she admits she never went inside with her, so she doesn't know what she was doing while at them. And so, for these 3 years, Jenny spun lie after lie, each grander than the last, built on the foundation of a life-changing, life-ending disease. It would be easy in hindsight to ask, did nobody think to look closer into the story? But I would then ask you, how confident would you need to be in your suspicion to question someone who claims to be facing down the barrel of the big C? Nobody wants to be the person to call bullshit on a terminally ill person, especially when they're your mother, your wife, your daughter, your close friend. And really, who can expect somebody they've known their whole life to do something so disgustingly vile? Unless you were a complete stranger, you'd have to have a very low opinion of the person to even start questioning their story in this circumstance. This is what allowed Jenny to get away with defrauding her loved ones. So Jenny may not have been physically unwell, but clearly there was something going on. In terms of the money, her parents had paid somewhere in the ballpark of $500,000 over the last 3 years, mostly for her bills, but also including a few, quote, expensive experimental treatment programs, one example given being a $13,000 one in Australia. Her friends and the public had paid somewhere in the $250,000 mark. So what was Jenny doing with all that money? And more importantly, what could drive a mother to do something like this to her child? This is my last update unless someone else updates. God is strong and can heal me, and by me saying this, I'm aware he can, but most likely I will not see April 10th, my 37th birthday. I told Flynn tonight and he says he will never forget me and will always hold the bear we made because I am his only mom. He has to go to Chattanooga and we are making our bills. If you can please help make this trip unforgettable. I'm in a place that I feel fear, sadness, anxiety, lost in what to do, but loved. Thank you for loving me. I love you. The answer is Jenny was a painkiller addict. According to the investigation, she was buying 30 to 40 non-prescribed Percocets per day. Percocets, of course, being an opioid-containing painkiller. Much of Jenny's social media presence has been lost to time, but according to the Justice.gov press release that came out after Jenny was sentenced to 25 months in prison for fraudulently raising money on false cancer claims, Jenny would frequently post to Facebook making updates about her situation, as well as reposting the GoFundMe, trying to raise more cash from anyone that she could. This entire situation came out of love. The only reason Jenny was able to get away with this for so long and to live this lifestyle was down to her being loved by her family, her friends, and her parents. The reason nobody saw through it was down to love, and the reason that she was caught was also down to love. Nobody in the family had any idea what was going on. It's only when third parties that had no love for Jenny, that could only see the objective facts, figured out that she was lying the whole time. They then were worried if they told people that Jenny would do something to her own life. So instead they turned the evidence over to the Attorney General and FBI, who started their own investigation, which lasted only a few weeks before they had enough to arrest Jenny. This is of course a bit of an older story, all transpired in 2017, and I imagine since it was only 25 months that Jenny is now out. Hopefully she's turned her life around, though the damage done to those around her will likely remain. At the time, her father said this: "I can't understand why she would have done it. I just don't know what would drive someone to do something like that, and I don't know how she could keep us fooled for so long." Now this is more than a story, it's a warning. This happens more commonly than you might think. It's only gotten more prevalent over the years, and is a good reason why you should always be skeptical of strangers and their stories. If people like Jenny can tell this lie to their child, their husband, their parents, what lie could they tell to a stranger? I'm not saying don't trust, but always verify.